speakers. I'd like to welcome everybody to this afternoon's meeting of the Workers' International. Today we're going to talk about the rise of the right, and we're going to share our experiences. There are a number of comrades who have indicated that they wish to talk about their own experiences in their own countries, but we're going to start off. Finn is going to do a general lead off for about 15 to 20 minutes first. So over to you, Finn. I'll tell you when you've been speaking for 15 minutes, okay?
Okay.
Is that all right?
Thank you,
Okay.
Pam. Comrades, we're having this discussion at a time of immense danger facing the working class and working class communities and the organised trade union movement. We must be careful not to underestimate the dangers that are now confronting us. There was a pogrom in Belfast last week, and I used the word advisedly because we don't often use the word pogrom. And incidentally, Elon Musk supported the pogrom that took place in Belfast. People were burnt out of their homes. Children were driven out of their homes. And Elon Musk supported it with his millions of followers. So that hasn't happened a lot in the past. Now, there have been fires set to centres that were designated for immigrants. But what happened in Belfast was different because what they did as well was they published the names and addresses of people who were living in Belfast from immigrant backgrounds. And it put me in mind of the riots following the Southport events of a couple of years ago, when there were riots and demonstrations in over 20 cities following the killing of a couple of young girls. And Musk also spoke following these riots in Southport and thereabouts, saying that civil war, this is the expression that Musk used, civil war is inevitable. The British MP, Rupert Lowe, from Restore Britain, as it's now known, made a comment as well, saying that millions must go. So we shouldn't underestimate the dangers that we now face. The perpetrators of this event in Belfast put graphic videos online to help them in their racist and divisive arguments. And the attack was on a 40-year-old man by a Sudanese, and this was the kind of excuse that was then used by the right wing to justify their mobilisation. There was then a massive demonstration in Belfast yesterday, where communities and trade unions turned out in big numbers to show their opposition to what's happening. In fact, in Dublin, I've just come from a demonstration this morning. There was also a demonstration in solidarity with the comrades who were taking action in Belfast. But like I say, the dangers are immense. There was a meeting in Poland on May the 30th, where 600 right-wing activists met in a convention to discuss what they now call remigration. Incidentally, the right wing are no longer the kind of a skinhead, combat-booted brigade they were kind of used to. These people who are now projecting themselves as leaders of this movement present a respectable image, a bit like Charlie Kirk in America, mobilizing amongst the students and middle-class people and trying to present arguments that would mobilize students. So that's a bit different. But nonetheless, there was a meeting in Portugal of the right, and at that meeting were members of the German Alternative für Deutschland, the Austrian neo-Nazi, Martin Sellner, Raise the Colours, that group was there from Britain, and from Ireland there was a group called the National Party. Not very significant, but nonetheless significant in the sense that it's an illustration of what could develop, and as I said earlier on, it's not, we should be careful not to underestimate what's happening. By the way, the principal speaker at the event that I referred to just now in Portugal was Greg Novino. You remember him? The guy with the long suit, thinking he was a Nazi general, marching around with the border police that Trump had sent in. And this guy thought that he was a leader of a Nazi movement, looking at the way he presented himself and the long coat that he wore. He was the main speaker at the Portugal event. And this term remigration is now being integrated into mainstream right-wing politics. I need to recognize that as a subtle change. It's already in use in America. The United States use the term quite a bit. and its origin goes back to the 1960s. But it's just an illustration of what's going on. But the dangers we're talking about are not just about Britain or Ireland, right across the European Union and other countries as well. In the UK, there's Nigel Farage representing a right-wing movement, which could well end up with him being the next Prime Minister of Britain, but also to his right, other movements which are even worse, led by the likes of Tommy Robinson or actually Lennon, which is real name. That's an immense threat to the workers. And Lennon or Tommy Robinson claims, or with a certain element of truth, that over 100,000 people turned out in a march that he called just over a year ago. In Italy, the right wing is in power. The Brothers of Italy, led by Meloni. In Germany, Alternative for Deutschland has got a huge support in many of the states of the Federation. In France, what used to be the National Front, but now the National Rally, as it's called, they could win the presidential election in 2027 under this guy, Eric Zemmour. In the Netherlands, there's a movement under Geert Wilders. There's a movement in Norway, in Denmark, in Spain, with Vox. In Austria, the largest party is the Freedom Party. But the global impact of the right is principally led by the United States and by Trump. And Trump's photograph and his name appears in many of these marches and demonstrations that take place in other countries. We should note also, it's not just Europe and America. There's a right-wing government in India, where Modi has used the Hindu religion to divide workers. In Russia, Putin stimulates and encourages right-wing movements across Europe. And of course, in Israel, there's a vicious right-wing government. Now, we're not facing fascism at the present time, but that doesn't mean we can't underestimate, or we should not underestimate, what's taking place. There's a collapse of confidence in the system in the United States. There's an increase in the interest, particularly younger people, what are called Generation Z, in socialism. There was an article in The Economist a few days ago on that issue. But the alienation that's been experienced in the States is very significant, because this helps the right wing to mobilize. And we should note Trump. Now, Trump, as we all know, is a multi-billionaire rich mogul with properties in New York and Florida. But he does articulate the anger that's being felt in working class communities right across America. Farage, incidentally, is the same. Farage also comes from a privileged background, private school, from a stockbroking family and so on. And he pretends he's an ordinary bloke from the East End with a pint in his hand and a fag in his mouth. In the same way that Trump, even the language that Trump's used, the language that he uses, is an expression of the anger. And workers feel they're not being represented by the existing political system. So Trump, and before him Biden, have no solutions whatever to any of the problems that workers in the United States face, no more than does Farage in Britain or Zemmour or the likes of them in France. But they do articulate the anger. And one thing we have to recognize in discussions of this nature is the presence of immense anger amongst workers in these communities that have been isolated, marginalized communities, economically powerless, politically isolated, unrepresented, social problems not being evenly shared across the communities. All these issues contribute to the anger. The shortage of housing enables the right wing to pretend that the reason there's a housing shortage is because the houses are being preferentially given to migrants, which of course is false. The reason there's a housing problem is because the capitalist class who own the banks, the land, and who control the government do not believe and do not want to see a program of public housing. There's a cost of living crisis. There's an energy crisis. And all of that has been blamed on migration. There's a health crisis where people can't get ready access to a doctor or to medical care. And that's been blamed by the right on the fact that so many migrants are given preferential treatment over them in the allocation of medical services. There's a piece on the paper in Ireland just a couple of days ago about a woman with 4 children who's on the Dublin Corporation housing list for 12 years. Imagine that, 12 years with 4 kids, and you're still on a waiting list to get a place to live. This enables the right wing to say, you see, these houses have been given to migrants preferentially, so the reason you're waiting 12 years is because foreigners are coming in to get up on the top of the list. It's all lies. Just saying the reason you can't get a ready medical or dental appointment for yourself or your children is because of the fact that migrants are given preferential treatment in this regard. Now, I want to make a point here about fascism. A lot of people misunderstand the present situation and describe it as fascism. There's a difference between fascism and racism. And I want to spend a minute making some points here. Now, we can discuss this. I mean, these are not, the arguments don't end with an opening contribution, so we can discuss it. But racism is a way of dividing workers. The very fact that there are demonstrations taking place in cities shows that we haven't reached the stage of fascism. Fascism, first of all, it's associated with arbitrary violence, destruction of democratic institutions, national fervor, exclusion, the destruction of independent trade unions and independent socialist organizations, the substitution of the leader for organization. Now, some of these features of fascism are present, and there's no question whatever, but the likes of Trump or Miller or Vance could well be fascist in their belief. Could well be, because they have lots of what they say contains characteristics of fascism. But that doesn't mean that fascism exists in these countries. Meloni in Italy has from time to time, or certainly in her past, supported fascism. But the regime that she's leader of is not a fascist regime. Racism is a way of dividing workers. Now, colonial powers have always used division. When they wanted to control countries, they used national division, religious division, ethnic division, language division, lots and lots of ways of dividing workers to prevent independence movements from developing. One of the worst examples is, of course, India, where the country was split into two, India and Pakistan, on the basis of mobilizing and stimulating religious divisions, Muslim versus Hindu. But what's happening today is not about dividing opposition to colonial control. It's about dividing workers in the industrial countries and preventing the proper unity that should exist between workers irrespective of religion, ethnicity, or any other aspect. So racism is just a way of dividing workers. It contains immense dangers, and some of these racist leaders, people like Robinson for that matter, are fascists. There's no question whatever about that. Or the man Sellner in Austria is a fascist. But the fact that you can demonstrate, go to a trade union meeting, build a socialist organization, take part in elections, take power in elections, extend the franchise beyond parliament into workplaces, all that can be done today. There's no barrier to stop that from happening. So that's why I'm making a distinction between fascism and racism. We have to combat racism concretely. There's many things we can do to combat racism. First of all, we support minorities. We have to defend minorities from attack, sometimes physically defend them from attack, which would have been necessary in Belfast in the recent events. We must also defend minorities in terms of ideas and the right to their cultural practices, the right to exist in peace, and to do what they traditionally would have done. We have to do that. We have to answer the arguments of the right wing. Now, I don't mean answer the arguments in meetings of this kind. I mean, we must go into the communities where these things are being discussed, take part in the discussions, and influence people on the ground in the communities where these ideas are beginning to emerge. In Dublin, there's a place called East Wall, which is a working class community, and there was an office building there which belonged to the energy supply company, which was then being converted, about to be converted, into a centre for refugees. There were big demonstrations in the area against that conversion of the building into accommodation for refugees, regular demonstrations. But what happened was activists and left-wing people in the area went down to these groups that were organising the marches and persuaded them that just stopping the conversion of this office block into accommodation does not solve the housing problems that the people in the East Wall were experiencing. There should have been, and there was, close contact between activists and the community, and the result was that the marches stopped. They don't take place now. There was another place in the north of Dublin where a factory was about to be converted into accommodation. There were demonstrations regularly, a lot of violence, but people intervened and tried to, alter the situation by going to local community meetings. So it's important that we get involved with the communities to draw them away from right-wing and racist ideas.
It's 15 minutes.
Sorry, Pam, it's the end, is it?
15 minutes, yeah.
Okay, I'll finish up shortly. So there has to be unity in action between trade unions and communities on programs that unite people around a common perspective. The reason there are problems with regard to housing, health, education, transport, and energy is because of capitalism. The capitalist system is unable to provide for the needs of communities because it is driven by the notion that the only way to get anything done in this society is for somebody to make money out of it. And that argument is to be taken on. So it's the crisis of capitalism that's expressing itself in the shortages of housing, health, transport, energy costs, and all that. Capitalism is responsible, and that's where the anger should be directed, and that's where the changes have to take place in the system. The various left-wing and socialist parties that have been in power across Europe in particular, they have shown with their policy of cuts to welfare, cuts in housing provision, privatization of public companies. They have created disillusionment where people are saying, what's the point in voting for the Social Democrats? Because the result is going to be the same as the capitalists. So part of the reason for the growth of the right is the failure of left-wing parties to take up the issues that confront workers at this time. So the cuts to services and the privatization, which are associated with these governments, has to be confronted, and new socialist parties have to be developed. And a program of expansion of public services, expansion of housing, expansion of health facilities, and the public ownership of the major companies needs to be on the banner of those who are trying to convince workers not to be influenced by racist policies. Thank you, comrades. And by the way, it's worth noting that the contributions that comrades make in this discussion today are extremely important as illustrations of how the issues are being faced in the individual countries. So my contribution has been of a general nature, of necessity, but comrades who speak insofar as they can should give us examples where changes are happening on the ground in communities which previously have felt isolated and disillusioned and left powerless and unable to influence events around them.
Thanks very much for that introduction, Finn. Just to explain to comrades that may have joined the meeting a little late, we're having a slightly different format today. I'm inviting comrades to make about a 5 or 6 minute contribution about their own situation. And then at the end of that, we'll then move to a discussion. So I've got a list of several names, and I'm guessing, Jack, you want to speak. In which case, we'll start with you, see you've got your hand up. Okay?
I had on mute.
About 5 or 6 minutes, just so we can fit everybody in. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. So this may be a little disjointed. I've been on vacation until a day or so ago. But I agreed with what Finn's remarks I thought were very good. But on the U.S., I want to qualify a little bit about Trump, which is Trump has been losing support among particularly white and younger white workers recently because of the increase in inflation and affordability, which had hit before he and Netanyahu started the war with Iran, and has gotten considerably worse since that time. The recent figures on inflation just published indicate that it was the highest in several years, and I think it's going to be continuing to go up. And there's that, and there's also the war. Trump campaigned as a peace candidate, so his popularity has been decreasing sharply. However, there's a core, and it's a very large core of tens of millions of supporters that are very dangerous, and there's a cult around him. He himself is not a fascist. He's a thug. He, I think, fashions himself somewhere between Louis XIV and Don Corleone. It's extremely corrupt, but the corruption is out in the open now. And recently, a few members of the Republican Party, his party, in both the House and the Senate, have broken with him on a few key issues, and there are some court decisions coming down against him. So the tide, the Republicans will get swept out in the November elections, assuming that there is anything approaching even the usual level of dishonesty in the U.S., but it may be far worse than that. The danger is that Trump, who claims that the elections were rigged and he was really elected in 2020, now is saying that California's system of accounting votes is rigged, and they're saying the same about other states. And there's real danger of large voter disenfranchisement, which is already beginning. There can even be invasion of the sites where votes are being counted, as actually came close to happening in Phoenix, Arizona in 2020, where there was a large mob of right-wing Trump supporters that had to be held out off of there. So I think that the situation is potentially turning. Trump has lost a lot of the working class, the white working class, especially younger white workers' support that Finn had mentioned that he had. However, there's no mass alternative really in the U.S., and without a mass alternative, the Democratic Party is not seen as a real alternative. There's Mamdani, and the bloom is somewhat off the rose for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. You have a small number, but you can't keep going to the well with those same people. There's no party of the working class, and it's not clear, what developments are gonna launch something like that. But without a mass alternative, people will it's going to be much more difficult to break people with Trump. Briefly, I have a question. If there is someone who's going to be talking about Italy, it's my impression that Meloni has moved from far right to something closer to the very far right of the center right, and distinct from, for example, Marine Le Pen, and certainly of the AfD, and that's one development. And then there was Orban's defeat by a former supporter of his in Hungary. So I wonder whether that's peaked. I didn't realize that Greg Bovino, who has been totally discredited in the U.S., was in Europe now. Bovino had to be thrown out of his position, as head of ICE, because of the huge pushback in Minneapolis. Finally, one other thing, which is Finn asked about communities who are fighting back. There has been many reports now of communities in the Midwest, which had been very passionate Trump supporters, almost blindly so, who are now rejecting Trump based on the clear failure of his policies and the fact that the demagogy is that they see that their lives and their livelihoods are being threatened by him. But Trump has the support of as people know, of a section of the Silicon Valley billionaires, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, even the Apple people have been holding their noses and supporting him, Jeff Bezos, and so on. I believe that that what Trump has given them is, first of all, the protection against the anti-monopoly and other regulatory on GMOs and so on that were being instituted by the EU somewhat at the beginning, and Trump is completely turning whatever he can in natural resources, and deregulating completely AI, genetic modified organisms, and so on. So I think that they will continue to support and fund this guy because he's giving them what they want, and that is, I think that aspect is important. So he has had this working class support, but it's really the but it's really these billionaires. Some of them, like Peter Thiel himself, is a proto-fascist. I'm going to stop there.
Thanks very much, Jack. I know there's a lot of hands up. I'm going to actually take comrades of the order. I've got them written down. So I think we should move on to some of the European comrades next. So Jörg, are you ready to come in now? Jörg, are you ready to come in now? Oh, you
Yeah,
can
yeah.
now. Okay, sorry. Not sure if you did me.
You mean
Okay.
Jörg from Germany, or? Yeah. Hello, comrades. Yeah, Russia asked us to talk a little about of the rise of the AfD, also at alternative alternative for Deutschland, far right, yeah, party. So I do my contribution now. The working title is more or less. I think that is valid for all discussion what we have about the rise of the far right parties in Europe. Europe. The working title is Dialectical Connection of the FD, Alarming Rise and the Crisis of the Left. So current electoral polling in Germany shows an alarming upward trend in voter support for the far-right AfD party, which currently stands at 27.3%, while the CDU-CSU under Chancellor Friedrich Merz stands at 20.9%. This leads to the conclusion that the AfD Chancellor in 2029 is not impossible. And should a CDU-AfD coalition come about, these two parties would be, according to the current polls, command a stable parliamentary majority. Despite this alarming development, we do not consider that the fascism in the short term will again knocking at the door in Germany. A logic development, not a surprise for us. For us as Marxists, this development is illogical and not surprising. The turn to the far right must be understood in the context of the failure of the left reformist politics, social democratic and the Greens party, the left party as well, and the trade union leaderships have cancelled their reformist traditions, adopted neoliberal ideologies, and supported counter reforms against the working class. With that policy, they're driving a significant part of the German working class into the arms of the far-right AfD. Germany, we think Germany is joining now in the broader European trend. Should the AfD enter the German government in 2029, Germany would be joined in a broader European trend in the direction of the participation of forward-right parties in the European governments. Since 2022, Giorgia Meloni has governed Italy with a party directly rooted in the transition of the Mussolini fascism. Viktor Orban governed Hungary from 2010 until the electoral defeat in 2026. Geert Wilders entered the Dutch government in 2023, and FPÖ has participated in the Austrian government on 5 occasions since 1983. Beyond these cases already mentioned, far-right and right-wing populist parties have participated in the national governments across at least 10 European countries over 10 past 2 decades, including Denmark, Norway, Switzerland, Sweden, Finland, Poland, Slovakia, and Czech Republic. Will this right development in short term lead to fascism? That is a question what we here discuss. The participation of the far-right parties in various governments has not led to the fascism coming to power. In broad terms, we have seen a continuation of the neoliberal policies with an additional focus on the restricting migration. Far-right governments have proven unable to create a stable political condition, and the trade unions have remained capable of action. Electrical polls are moreover a snapshot of the current situation, and the continent-wide rightward trend could change dramatically should significant working class struggles and new formation of working class organizations emerge. Yeah, the nature of the AfD, unlike many on German left, we do not characterize the AfD as a fascist party. Founded in 2013 as a liberal and Eurosceptic party, it shifted significantly to the right under Frauke Petry and experienced a substantial surge during the 2015 refugee crisis. Today, the party is dominated by three distinct wings: the wider Kupela leadership, which projects a governable and economic liberal image, while parallel carrying strong as nationalist and xenophobic element in its program. The ethno-nationalist Höcke wing, rooted in the German folkish tradition of the ethnic racial nationalism dominant in Eastern Germany and containing a quasi-fascist elements, and West German's conservative wing seeking coalition compatibility with the CDU and try to get support from the German Business Association. Should the AfD enter in the government in 2029, their anti-establishment narrative will collapse, and the Höcke wing will demand even more radical program, placing greater emphasis on social questions while incorporating quasi-fascist elements. I think like the NSDAP in the 30s of the last century. A split within the party cannot be ruled out then. The mainstream adaptation of the AfD anti-immigration agenda. Both the former Ampel coalition and the current CDU-SPD government have in large parts implemented the AfD anti-immigration agenda. From returns improvement.
Jörg,
Yeah.
can you stop? You have been going for several minutes. Can I stop you shortly? And then you can come back into the discussion later, just so we give everybody a chance to speak. Okay, thank you.
Okay. To make it shorter here, so there was a complete overtaking of the anti-immigration agenda. So, and we see not deep differences between the established parties and the AfD. So there is not a big obstacle that will take place a coalition between the AfD and the CDU. And also other factor is the amplifying of the FDP electoral support that this party is positioned as peacemaker party by the oppositioning military support for Ukraine, calling for end of the war through negotiations and the resumption of the economic relation with Russia. Paradoxically,
I'm going to have to stop you afraid now. Could you just hold on to it just till we get into the discussion? Because Andros, I'm going to bring Andros from Greece in next. He can't stay for the whole meeting, so I'm going to invite him to speak. Yeah, is that okay? And then you can come back later with the rest of it. Okay. Thank you for your contribution. Andros, are you there?
Hi, comrades. I hope you can hear me well because I am on mobile data. That's why I turned off my camera. It's good to see you, and thanks very much for the invitation. I will say a few things about Golden Dawn in Greece. As I said at the beginning, I'm actually at a festival which will begin to get very loud soon. I mean, in something like half an hour. Which is an anti-fascist festival organized in Petroupoli. That's a municipality in the west of Athens. It's a working class area. As a response to the attack by Golden Dawn members against two young youth comrades who were distributing material. And I'm starting with this because it shows that although Golden Dawn has been found guilty in the Greek courts described by the courts as a criminal organization, and despite the fact that the leadership of Golden Dawn is in jail, and despite the fact that Golden Dawn split into 3 or 4 different parts, it is still present, it still attacks its opponents, and it's not gone. And that's an important point, I believe, to start with. I should say that I fully agree with the analysis that Finn made at the beginning about the difference between fascism and the far right, and the position taken that we see the rise of the far right everywhere, but we don't see fascism yet, although we have fascist groups in most of the far right parties, or fascist individuals who are very active in these far right parties. In Greece, we have both. We have the far right, which I don't know how many comrades know, but in the recent Euro elections in Greece, the far right parties altogether, they got 21% of the vote, which is massive. But we should know that this is because, or it's based on the fact that abstention was at an unprecedented rate. Abstention reached, together with blanks, blank votes, and it approached 60%, 60, of the electorate. And this is unprecedented in Greece. So it's on this basis that the far-right parties are growing, and they have this high percentage in the recent elections. But we also have the Nazis, who are a criminal organization indeed. They attack people, they kill people, as everybody, all comrades who are present know, because it was the murder of Pavlos Fissas, a musician, an artist who started the procedure by which Golden Dawn was taken to court. Now, after the verdict against Golden Dawn and the jailing of its leaders, there was a widespread impression that Golden Dawn is finished and that the Nazis in Greece are over. We argued against this on 2 basic points. First, that Greek capitalism was in crisis, is in crisis, and will continue to be in crisis. Second, the left continues to be in crisis. We had the sellout by Syriza, which was a shock to the mass of the workers in Greece. And there is no mass left party existing at this stage, offering any kind of perspective. And the anti-capitalist left, although it's quite strong in the social movements and in the local elections, it has not been able to build something that could provide a vision and a perspective to the laboring masses. So we have the crisis of capitalism and the crisis of the left. And this is very fertile ground for the far right in general, but also for the Nazi groups like Golden Dawn. Now, in the last 5 months, I mean, since the beginning of the year, we have seen repeated attacks by Golden Dawn supporters, not just in the area I'm present now, in Petroupolis, but at least in 5 municipalities in Athens. And we've seen also other provocations in other cities. Now, what is interesting is that they are all based on school students. It is school students who do the attacks. It is school students who do the provocations. And this is bringing back to memory the policies by which Golden Dawn was able to become a significant force in the past decades, starting from a few hundred individuals in the end of the 80s and the beginning of the 90s to 7% in parliamentary elections and to up to 14% in polls. So they're repeating a very successful tactic that they had in the past. They go to the school students and they take advantage of the energy of teenagers and they direct it against migrants. They promote racism. They promote nationalism, of course. They promote conservative ideas about the role of men, masculinity, the role of women should be in the house. And they turn this youth into attack squads. And this is very dangerous. It's not a general danger. It's a concrete danger that's coming up in the near future because we have been through it. I should say something which I don't know if many comrades know here. In the elections of 2012, that's 14 years ago. It's a long time, but it's a very important experience. Golden Dawn was attacking physically every stall by every left party that was standing in the elections, including the Communist Party, which is a mass force and with a very long roots in the working class, including Syriza, which was a mass force at that time, and including the anti-capitalist organizations. And there was no response. There was no united response by the left of any kind against the attacks of Golden Dawn. And then, of course, they went too far. They murdered Pavlos Fyssas, and the countdown started for Golden Dawn till the courts of 2020. So they're back. They aim at the schools, and we are mobilizing because we have to build anti-fascist mobilizations and movements from below. The anti-fascist coordination of Athens and Piraeus, which is an important conquest of the anti-fascist movement in Greece, uniting many left organizations and a number of trade unions, like grassroots trade unions, has been very active. And also we've taken a new initiative, which is called Anti-Fascist Network in Education, bringing together teachers, parents, and school students who want to get active in fighting Golden Dawn in the schools and in education. This has provided inspiration to many people. Now, this network is spreading now in 4 or 5 neighborhoods in Athens, and it's actually been spreading to other cities outside Athens, starting with the city of Volos, which is somewhere in central Greece. So we are fighting back. We have to fight back because, unfortunately, the official left, whatever is left of it, to be honest, and the official unions are not taking the initiative. But there are significant forces to mobilize from below, and of course, try to push the unions and try to push the rest of the left in taking initiatives. And I will end by saying that anti-fascist work is crucial. United anti-fascist work by left organizations and by trade unions, grassroots unions, and nationally organized unions. This is crucial. It's not enough on its own. We also need to rebuild the left to provide a socialist perspective, anti-capitalist fight, and a socialist vision to society. Otherwise, the far right will be back and the fascists will be back on the streets. Thank you, comrades. Sorry if I took a bit longer.
Just hopefully you'll be able to stick around for some of the discussion. At least that's a very, very useful report. So I'm going to move to Themos, who's going to report from Cyprus now. Are you there, Themos?
Yes, thank you. I'm just going to say a few things because the latest elections have given a sort of picture of how the far right is doing. The far right is an import from Greece. It's an offshoot of Gordon Dawn. So it started as a nasty Nazi outfit. But as it managed to grow, we started having people moving from the mainstream right-wing party to it, because the mainstream right-wing party was covering all these extreme right people in its ranks. And it was expected in these elections to get a very substantial increase, probably double its vote, and reach something in the region of 18 or 19%. And there was discussion of even surpassing AKEL, the Communist Party, which was virtually written off by many people, because it was losing votes since the last parliamentary elections, and the polls were showing it on the level of 18 to 20%. Nevertheless, the elections showed this was not quite that bad the situation. AKEL made a remarkable recovery to more than its vote in 5 years ago, and Elam, the far right party, although it got quite a large increase in its vote, about 40% of its it increased by 40% its vote, and it doubled its seats in parliament. But that was at a cost, in the sense that they were disappointed because they expected more, and the more the MPs they elected, they are not most of the MPs they elected were not from the hardcore of the party. This shows, I think, that we don't have just a shift to the right. We have a polarization of society rather than anything else. And it's important that the increase in the AKEL vote, I believe, came from the fact that it was isolated by the rest. It was considered that it would lose, so they were fighting for their existence, and they started putting forward much more radical ideas, and much more. And they went to the grassroots, and they mobilized much better than before. And I think they started at some stage spelling blood, and they really went for it. So they got this even small win. That was something very important. The more general picture is that Elam is becoming a sort of legitimized by the rest of the right-wing parties. They are talking to them. They cooperate with them. They had discussions to cooperate in electing the president of the parliament. So and also their ideas moved to the right. So we have now a right-wing bloc which contains Elam, VC, that's the far right, the right, and DICO, the center-right party, which they can cooperate and they can pull off whatever policies they want. Nevertheless, each of these parties has internal frictions and quarrels, because they don't all have the same ideas, and they have also quarrels between them. So we are not sure how this is going to materialize. On the left, AKEL got the support of a new party, which was formed by a former anti-corruption campaigner, whose only policy you can understand is the anti-corruption stance. In every other situation, they have no serious policies and they have no idea of how they are going to tackle anything else. They supported Akel in the election for the presidency of parliament, and I think that they hope that they will cooperate in the next presidential elections. We hope that Akel will not fall for that, and that will continue its fighting stance. We are not very optimistic about that, but certainly for the moment at least, they are putting forward ideas that, and some of these ideas were even taken from our own program, which we produced during the elections and after the elections, and we were giving ideas of how it was going to be. I'm not saying that they copied it, but they certainly could have. I mean, it's a real change in what we see. We don't expect this to last for long. We shall see how it goes. We shall try to continue pressing them by putting forward among the people of the left our ideas of what should be done now and how to tackle the far right. The far right also was 2 years ago. They did organize 2 pogroms in Cyprus within a week, but that caused a real reaction with the mass demonstrations, and they stopped that. Now they are making trouble, and they are doing the same. They are trying to try their luck again. I don't know how it's going to develop. So Akel gathered all the calls for the cooperation of all the left organizations, which in the past they never wanted to speak to. And they organized a sort of front against fascism, which unfortunately it worked for a few months, but then it fell into disuse, and we are talking now about reviving it, but I'm not optimistic about that either. The fact is that there is a hard struggle ahead. The situation is not lost. The right wing has the upper hand for the moment, but there is a lot of scope for fighting back.
Dave Hill now from Brighton.
Oh, yeah, hi. Sorry. Yeah, hi, comrades. Good to be here. Thank you for inviting me. What I want to talk about in my 5 minutes is about the rise of the far right in England, and then to make some comments about the far right internationally and the nature of fascism, and to follow up to some extent on what Andros was saying about resistance. Okay, the far right in Britain are on the march. I mean, so is the resistance. But I've been involved in anti-racist and anti-fascist politics for more than 60 years. And never in my life did I think we would see a march of led by a known fascist, Tommy Robinson. This is a year ago, a march of 150,000 people in Trafalgar Square. And there was only a fraction of that on the anti-fascist, anti-racist march. And that was quite a shock to me, because we've always had in the anti-fascist and anti-racist movements in Britain, we've also always had a policy of confronting fascists and racists on the streets, as well as electorally, and as well as, if I can use the word, culturally in our social media, etc., etc. Okay, so how are they doing? Well, I think comrades who read the international press will know that Reform under Nigel Farage are predicted to be the biggest party at the next election. And possibly we may have Nigel Farage, who is not a fascist, but he panders to them. And he's an anti-immigrant, xenophobic, far-right neoliberal. It is likely he will be the next. It is possible, not likely, possible he will be the next leader. There's a big election of the next prime minister. It is possible that in this coming Thursday's very important by-election in Britain, in Makerfield, where the Andy Burnham, a slightly more working class potential leader of the Labour Party, may win, but it is equally possible that Reform might win. And I want to, talking about that election, I want to make the point that there is actually a fascist party called Restore, and they are getting, in the opinion polls, 7% of the likely votes. Now, this is an outright fascist party where recently the leader, Rupert Lowe, actually said he's going to, if he gets into power, he's going to prosecute and imprison those MPs and officials who have facilitated immigration. Now, that's quite something, retrospective legislation of that type. Yesterday, I was at a demonstration in Brighton, and the resistance is good. The resistance in Belfast, the resistance in Glasgow, the resistance in Sheffield. I mean, I've got the figures here. Yesterday in Brighton, one of the far-right parties and their leader came to town, and they couldn't move more than 100 yards. They were stopped. There were about 300 of them. There were 4,000 of us. And I want to make the point that they were protected by the police, who used quite harsh violence, violent police violence, including pepper spray, use of batons, use of police horses against the anti-fascist demonstrators. But we saw them off. I want to pick up on something that Finn said. Now, I've never met Finn, but we think alike. And the fear, the intimidation that he described it in England and he described it in Belfast. And it is terrifying, where far-right mobs use petrol bombs in England, not just in Belfast, but over the last few years to try to burn out migrant hostels. So there is fear, intimidation. Fortunately, we are there nearly all the time, combating the fascists and the racists. A brief note, moving on, why, and this is very brief, why is the far right growing? Well, this has been alluded to already. First of all, there is the impoverishment and the immiseration, to use a Marxist term, the impoverishment and immiseration of the working class, of sections of the working class. Have no time to go into that. We also, as various comrades have described, had the retreat from social democracy. Social democratic parties, such as the Parti Socialiste, such as the Labour Party, are now no longer social democratic parties. They've moved very far to the right. They're alternative conservative parties. And the third reason for the growth of the far right is, but this is not new, is the role of the mass media. I mean, I remember, I wasn't alive, but the Daily Mail in England, a headline in the 1930s, "Hurrah for the fascists." And actually, a lot of the press, the Daily Express, the Daily Mail, etc., still are giving a very soft support. But of course, now, as one of the speakers mentioned, now there's the support of Elon Musk and the various social media. Okay, I don't need to go on about how the far right state, how sections of the far right have captured and used the state against the working class and against the left. And they use it, to use Althusser's terms, through the ideological state apparatuses, through the television, through the media, through schooling, etc., etc. And they use it through the repressive state apparatuses. Again, if you're reading the newspapers, Palestine Action, a absolutely non-terroristic group, has been banned, and you can people my age, many, more than 100, have been arrested simply for holding up a sign, "I support Palestine Action." And we've seen, 2 days ago, we've seen some people imprisoned on terror charges for damaging an Israeli a factory that was producing arms for Israel.
Start winding up, Dave, and come back into the discussion. Is that okay?
Time's up. Yeah, well,
you finished
I'm halfway through, but that's fine.
Sorry, it's really difficult to fit everybody in. I think we might have to extend.
We've got to get on to the resistance and the United Front.
Okay, thank you, Dave. We might have to extend the meeting a bit, I think, to actually get everybody in. Now, Matthew and Ian, you said one of you would report on Scotland. I don't know which one's going to. Enrico, are you going to give us a report on Italy? You might. I'll bring you into the general discussion then. So, Ian or Matthew, which one of you? And then we start the general discussion.
So we've had it harder than us. If you'd like to do a report from there, and then I might come into the general discussion. Or
just choose one of you can come into the discussion. Yeah. Okay.
Matthew,
we'll wait for Matthew.
Yeah, thanks so much. I think in terms of the far right, I think in international terms, one of the things that people should be very aware of is the fact it is now very organised internationally. They have international conferences on a very regular basis, organised particularly obviously by Steve Bannon, the Trumps, and funded by Musk, etc. And so that is going on within both Europe, the US, and Latin America. So in those terms, it's a real international far right movement. And that people should watch that. In terms of what happens here in Glasgow, of course, what you basically got is two bits of the far right itself. I mean, in terms of how it manifests on the street. I mean, you have the old line, basically the fascists and the reform. And reform is essentially what reform has done in Scotland is to take the Tory vote. All of the sort of working class vote of the Tories, most of it has gone to reform. As I say, in here, basically, you're talking about the core of it is the loyalist orange working class, and what we get, as I say, is two bits: the sort of bit that associates with the fascist groups, and then reform and so on. On the street, in street terms, is much smaller. Turns out reasonably regularly, and basically the response is to pin them down. They've not managed to do anything particularly within the area. Because whenever they appear, we can outnumber them. We can do, we can be louder than them. We've got better sound systems and all the rest of it. The other side, in terms of is a much larger group, which appears less frequently. And the problem being, of course, is that the fascists have been desperately for decades trying to do a deal with the main orange organisations in the city, and they've always failed. And I suspect probably because the orange organisations are much more lined up with the state. So that may change. This, of course, tends to relate to what happens in Ireland. So, of course, you can see on this week. That as soon as we had the demo in Belfast, we also had the big demo in Glasgow. Well, relatively big. It's about 500 people. but mobilised on a very short notice. And this is a lot more dangerous. I mean, essentially organised around football supporters of the Rangers Football Club. There are various bits in the Rangers Football Club who fancy themselves as fascists, dress in black, and so on and so forth, and go around occasionally beating people up on the street. And it's these people that they got out. And this is different. There's a different lot of people, and they're much younger and they're much more difficult to counter because obviously the organisation. This is done at very short notice on social media. So it makes it very much more difficult to get enough people out at the sort of notice you're looking at in order to try and counter it. So then, as I say, this week we had that demonstration. The real problem is, of course, that while, I mean, as I say, we can hold them down and we can stop them from operating and all the rest of it. The question becomes, well, what is the alternative? Because obviously, the problem being, of course, is the place is just getting in a far worse state. I mean, we're still suffering neoliberalism, et cetera, and the main political forces is organised. The Socialist Workers' Party is essentially setting itself up as a defender of the existing order and of basically of neoliberal politics, i.e., vote for anybody apart from the far right, which means essentially that in here it means the Labour Party, the SNP, etc., who just practice the same politics. So therefore, in those terms, it's certainly a losing strategy. And the key question becomes, what is the alternative of the working class, and is there any political expression of the working class? Which is why the destruction of your party recently is essentially a criminal, should be seen as a criminal offence by those people who did it, because what it is a desperate effort to prevent any kind of political expression of the working class. Clearly, and to prevent any kind of challenge to the system itself, because obviously that's critical. So in those terms, we can see that if it carries on, then things will the far right will carry on growing because there isn't the left has not put forward any real alternative. Thanks.
Right, thanks for that, Matthew. Thank you for being brief. Right, so everybody's spoken now that wanted to. I'm sorry I've had to sort of stop some of you. I realise you hadn't finished what you were saying, but I'm sure you appreciate the difficulty of getting everybody's contribution in. So if you can now put your hand up if you want to come into the general discussion. I'm going to take Enrico next, and then maybe Rodri, unless somebody else wants to speak first. So put your hands up if you want to speak. Okay, Enrico, would you like to go now, please?
Yeah, I see that I want to give just a short answer to the question that Jack put about Meloni for first things. Well, Meloni, in my opinion, didn't change. The only thing is just a question of tactic. She is coming from a fascist background. She's still what she is. Of course, in Italy, at the moment, they're not the condition for fascism, because there is not. So, she turned after the referendum that she lost, and she realized that continuing going on with the same politic, for example, the war, Gaza, etc., she have to change, because if not, she's losing a lot of votes. That is all about what is Meloni. Meloni is still the same. She's a politician and she's looking for the inside market. And the inside market, if she wants to win the next election, she have to change a little bit. And that is nothing else to say about Meloni. Instead I want to say is about the debate that is happened today. I must say that everything was clear, not exception. The reason on what's happening in Europe or in America is clear, and is that, in my opinion, that is not enough. I want to make just one point and try to maybe start something different. The situation that we have today is not new. maybe change form, change, of course, the historical moment is different. But if we look in, or we study the background that was in Europe between the 1900, the 1800s, so and the 2000, so between 1890 and the First World War was a big debate about this question, because we have the same, more or less the same situation. If we look in the debate that was inside the Second International, was more or less with the same. The problem is that populism or the turn on the right is something that happened historically, especially when we have a situation of dark, so economic crisis, immigration, fear, etc. The right or the populism have gain point. For me, the thing is more or less we can close in 3 points. Fascism and democracy, I can say, is not fascism or democracy in absolute. There are always a balance, depending on the historical period, between there are more fascism or more democracy, depend how the economy and the situation is going. What to be done? I have the impression, I'm not sure, but I have the impression that at this point, the majority just say that more or less we have to choose or we have to defend the democratic democracy. When even Lenin and Engels before say that democracy is the best shell for the capitalist dictatorship. So why we have to defend something that is the best shell for the dictatorship of capitalism, when we want to destroy the capitalism, we want to change society? And the last point for me, very important, is the party. How we fight capitalism in its different phase, what she's coming out. And as I said, fascism and democracy are the two methods or the two forms of the same capitalist dictatorship. So the important is following Lenin's idea. The proletariat must be able to fight democracy and fascism simultaneously. It must be able to do so all the time, but especially when democracy turns into fascism. So who is fighting? How we fighting the capitalism? In our opinion, is with the party. So the party that in this historical moment could not be a mass party, because the mass, if we look in, thanks to what everybody say, more or less, thanks to the media, thanks to everything, the immigration, thanks to the fear, etc., is going to the right. So we have to have and build up a party, an organization that is inside the working class, that will be able one day, when the working class will be wake up and they understand all the fraud of the capitalism to think, the party that will be inside and will be able to direct the party. The last thing, because the time is very little, I just want to make a difference between the idea of the party. For Rosa Luxemburg, for example, the party, let me say, because I would like to tell the exact word, the party is more likely to be the effect than the cause of the revolutionary process. I disagree with that, and I am agree with Lenin analysis that was based on the presupposition that organization is the premises of the revolutionary project. So what we have to do, in my opinion, is to work for organize a party of cadre and to be ready when the time will come in. I finished that for the moment.
Thanks very much, Enrico. Right, so we move on to Ian, followed by Roger. And can anybody else that wants to speak put their hand up, please? Go on, Ian.
Hi, thanks. Just a couple of quick additional things on Scotland and then on the UK situation of the last week or two, which is quite a scary one. I think UK-wide, we've seen it's come out of the north of Ireland in the last week or so, and the biggest spillover in the mainland of Britain has been in places with significant orange histories and sectarianism. So Glasgow, also Liverpool, further down the coast, and so on. We've seen also on yesterday the fascists really outnumbered in Glasgow 20-1, 4,000 or 5,000 people came out. I was in Edinburgh on a National Palestine demonstration that are usually reasonably well attended. It was well down this time round, but I think because a lot of the people certainly who'd have been coming through for it from other parts of the country, especially Glasgow, and even some folk from Edinburgh were on the counter mobilisation in Glasgow instead. In fact, I was also at the Leith Festival promoting your party Edinburgh's Cuba fundraiser. I talked to an old friend from my Labour Party days. Nice catch up. I think the first time met in person since my expulsion. And one of the good people still in the Labour Party said if she hadn't had a stall, not the Labour stall, to be clear, at the Leith Gala, she was interested in going through to Glasgow. So I think it really struck a nerve that we have to push back on this. I think we have to walk and chew gum at the same time as a left. I saw one comment on a video, I think from George Galloway, maybe denouncing these riots in Belfast. Somebody said racism these days is a meaningless saying because people say everything's racist, and they were basically defending these rioters. And it's obviously a right-wing bot attacking George or whoever it was, because I've seen a few, obviously, social media over the week on it. Even at one of our left meetings, I think at a Republic YP meeting, one of the comrades did interject about concerns about immigration, and not everyone who has some's racist. I'd certainly say not everyone who voted for Brexit was racist, and some sections of the left saying that they were caused difficulties. But we also have to be clear, whatever the difficulties of the left relating to wider layers have been, when you've got people going house to house trying to burn out anyone in their description black, when you've got checkpoints set up by rioters to beat up anyone who isn't white, that is racism. And we have to reassert that. I said that on Crispin Flintoff show about the need to walk and chew gum at the same time, and the difficulties in Britain, where also you've got Restore UK setting up branches, Restore Britain rather, Rupert Lowe's fascistic split from Reform, setting up branches quicker than your party. It was founded after your party with a much more obscure leader, but it's not had the self-sabotaging bureaucratic difficulties of setting up factionalism that we've had. So it's now doing better in the polls and has set up branches for this kind of ethno-nationalist outfit. So yeah, real need for a left alternative, and that's also shown at the Scottish elections, where Reform broke through with 17 seats. To be fair to the SWP, Matthew, within your party, they were one of the organisations saying that we should stand. And I think they had a lot of feedback from their Sutter stalls that, okay, you're saying don't vote Reform, but who do you vote for? So they were taking that argument into your party, but unfortunately, as we know, that didn't happen, and the only new kids on the block in the scunnered election in Scotland were Reform. I think in Scotland, some of the nationalist uprising that's been going on around the world, protest vote, has been channeled in a way that isn't racist, although it is nationalist, through the Scottish National Party. Quite a neat trick almost, vote against the English because they're nasty racists unlike us. But a lot of that's coming apart too. It was never going to last. Because SNP's record in government has left nobody enthusiastic for them. They won basically by default because of Labour being even worse in Westminster for 2 years in terms of losing support than they were in 2 decades at Holyrood. So, Reform now tying with Labour for second place in Scotland. And as Matthew said, the kind of orange unionist vote, looking for who's the most effective unionist, which includes unionists with regard to Ireland. That was what the term always used to mean in Scotland, party to vote for. So yeah, there's real need for a left party, left intervention to channel this mood, because yeah, we don't want to end up, as Matthew said, looking like defenders of the establishment. Trump's had quite a neat trick in the States, very toxic, of red baiting the establishment, talking about the communists in power who were persecuting him when it was Joe Biden. Then you have to, if you're defending reality, say, no, Biden's very much not a communist. But sometimes it creates confusion. Are you defending the left or defending the likes of Biden, while Trump's toxifying both? And certainly, I'll end with this. I'd like to ask a question to Jack. I think he's very much right about the sheen going off, especially AOC. I think Danny's done a little bit better so far. But I saw Kashama Sawant for our campaign in Seattle for Congress, was also in New York campaigning against the betrayals of AOC. I saw some AOC fans going a bit mad about that on Twitter. I thought that was quite a cool combative move for someone from the further left. So I'd just like to ask if she's got any chance in her campaign to be the first socialist who's not a Democrat in Congress, or if that's just another very small sectarian intervention, because she did break through to the council a few years ago, and if something like that broke through on a national level, it could create a bit more hope again in the States.
Thanks very much for that, Ian. So we'll move on to Roger now. Please put your hand up if you want to ask any questions of any of the contributors, or you want to expand on your contribution you've made already. So Roger now.
Yeah, thanks, comrades. I think it's very good that we've got comrades from so many countries here. I think eight countries represented, and this is an issue which is threatening all of us. And I think it's come as a bit of a shock to all of us, because there's been quite a sharp transition over quite a short period between the kind of old paternalistic liberalism that we saw, which of course itself completely hypocritical and completely exploitative and repressive in its own way. But the old guard, if you like, the old regimes of in the advanced capitalist countries in Europe and in USA. There's been those have been displaced. We have now the old kind of paternalistic liberalism, I say, it's gone, and there's been this change in the whole stance of the ruling class is something that we've seen before, and I think we need to start by recognizing the almost uncanny echo and parallel we see with what happened in the 1930s. In the period today, like the 1930s, which began with Wall Street crash in 1929, and we then had, well, we already had the rise of fascism in Italy, and we had, of course, the rise of Hitler in Germany, but we also saw all kinds of horrors. We saw um, the wars in the invasion of Ethiopia, the invasion of China, the Spanish Civil War, all kinds of repressive events, and all of that was a very sharp period of class conflict and of repression. And if we compare the situation then, I've made the analogy before. Really, what we had in the first half of the 20th century, we had really one continuous war, or you could say a 30 years war between of the First and Second World Wars and the interregnum in between, when you had all of these horrors that I've just indicated. What do we see today? We saw the economic collapse in 2008. We're on the eve, as we've discussed many times before, of a new recession, perhaps even more shocking and destabilizing coming. We see at the present time three major wars taking place: the Ukraine war, the genocidal Holocaust in Gaza, the West Bank, and Lebanon, and the US war with Iran. We see also dotted around the globe many civil wars in Yemen, in Congo, in Sudan, in Myanmar, and probably many that I've left out. We see a situation unthinkable before, at least in the open, brazen brutality of it. An American president calmly threatening to wipe out an entire civilization and to bomb it into the Stone Age. We have governments now, particularly the governments of Europe, spending billions on new armaments and introducing conscription and openly and in so many words explicitly preparing for a third world war. We see brutal repression of protests and solidarity, something which has come as a shock in Britain, with, for instance, the draconic sentences on really quite mild demonstrators against the Holocaust in Gaza, who've been one of them has got an 8-year sentence on charges of terrorism, for which he was not even accused. He wasn't even, let alone convicted. It's simply something brought in that the government, a Labour government, so-called, is abolishing or almost abolishing jury trials in Britain now, and all kinds of things which would have been unthinkable only a couple of years ago. So all of this, and in America, troops have occupied American cities. Migrants are being snatched off the streets. And we see this kind of dark cloud of far-right parties taking over in country after country, in not only in Europe, but in most of the world. And we now, the last stand, if you like, is we will probably see in the next 2 or 3 years the AfD coming to power in Germany. I hope maybe Jürgen will be able to come back. The National Rally in France, and Reform in Britain, all poised to snuff out, if you like, the last remaining chinks of light. And in London and cities throughout Europe, we've seen fascist mobs strutting the streets. As Dave said, it was a big shock to see the mobilization of behind Tommy Robinson, who is an open fascist. I mean, there is no there is no none of the kind of pretense and hypocrisy that we see in the guise of Farage. Farage, I think, is what Ted Grant used to say about Enoch Powell. He's not a fascist, but he's what was the word he said? He's the pacemaker for fascism. By the development of Farage's party has now led to the even more alarming and horrifying rise of the so-called Restore Party. And as again, I think Dave said, Rupert Lowe by name and low by nature, maybe you could say he really is an embodiment of fascism with a program, as you say, for mass expulsions of millions of people. He said millions of people need to be driven out of the country and huge numbers of people jailed. And it's an absolutely a really scary, frightening outlook. And then, as proof of that, we saw only last week the terrible pogrom in Belfast, with with migrants being burnt out of their hostels. It's surprising that nobody actually died in that, and maybe there will be deaths arising from that in the aftermath. But following riots in Britain, and as comrades said, the mass marches by Tommy Robertson, etc. But having said all that, let's also see the fight back is still to come, because what we saw in the 30s came at the end of periods of class struggle. It came in Italy after 2 or 3 years of mass mobilization by the working class, factory occupations and so on. In Germany, 15 years, when again and again the workers tried to take power, and they tried to carry through a revolution. And in this case, that has not happened yet. The workers have still to speak. There are already mass mobilizations, a little taste perhaps of what's to come. It was very, very heartening. I'm sorry that there's nobody here from Northern Ireland. I was hoping that comrades would be able to attend. But it was good to see a big mass mobilization of protest against the riots in Belfast, and as Dave has said, in Brighton, and I think in Glasgow and so on. We've seen really a little taste of a polarization, and I think in a way I'm reminded again of a phrase I think used first by Trotsky, of that sometimes the revolution needs the whip of counter-revolution. And I think that's what we can see happening, or we're hoping we're beginning to see that happening here, not only in Britain, but worldwide. That actually people are being shaken out of their torpor, shaken out of their complacency, shaken out of the delusion that really, basically, we still live in a democracy and all the rest of it. And there's a sharp polarization about to take place. And I think that we'll not see the realization of a true fascist program, despite the fact that these people are every bit as repulsive and as evil and as negative as the fascist leaders of the past. But I think they will only realise their true potential after there's been a complete defeat of resistance by the working class. And therefore, if you like, the ball is in our court. The ball is on the part of the working class to stop the fascists and the racists in their tracks. And one last point, I think it's partly why has this happened? Because of the changed composition also of capitalism and of the ruling class. Within just the 5 years, 2020 to 2025, that's the period of the pandemic, of the beginning of the Ukraine war, the beginning of the Gaza genocide, during the whole period of mass suffering throughout the world. During that period, the collective wealth of the billionaires grew by 81%. In those 5 years, almost doubled to a total of 18.3 trillion. And Elon Musk, it's very, very significant that Elon Musk is actively promoting and financing these movements. Whenever I mention his name, I say soon to become a trillionaire. He became a trillionaire this week. He has at his disposal $1 million. He's got unlimited funds to spend on acting as a patron to not just to the Farages and to the, if you like, the mainstream far right today, but he's actively supporting Tommy Robinson, who's leading the street armies, fascist street armies, and he's financing Rupert Lowe. And Rupert Lowe, as I say, he is a horrific threat. And what I'm afraid of is this: maybe Reform won't get a majority in the next election in Britain, but Badenoch, the leader of the Tory party, has just announced that if Reform is the biggest party, the Tory party will support a Reform government. And not only that, but Rupert Lowe is already an MP and he will probably regain his seat. And I can see the possibility of a coalition government of Reform plus the Tories plus Restore. And we might see this horrible monster Rupert Lowe could well be a minister in the government, perhaps Home Office, Home Secretary, in which case there would be an absolutely horrifying threat. But as I say, that threat will meet its answer, will meet a mobilisation. We saw a little frisson, a little taste of that in the last few days, but I think we'll see that on a massive scale. And okay, I'll leave it at that, comrades. Thanks.
Thanks, Roger. Mike Craig was intending to come today, but he's got internet problems apparently, so unfortunately. I've seen a report that Tommy Robinson's been arrested at the airport again. I don't know if anybody knows anything about that or wants to say anything. Right, Dave, you're next.
Yeah, 3 quick points. Nobody at this meeting needs reminding of the horrors of fascism. And I've been looking at in some of the work I do, looking at the comments. They hate us. Fascists and Nazis describe us as subhuman. They view us, Marxists, socialists, even liberals, they view us the same as the Israeli state and the IDF view the population of Gaza. I mean, I read this stuff. And Steve Bannon, just to take a mild example, Steve Bannon has described teachers as terrorists, not a few teachers in general as terrorists. In other words, anybody who stands up for something which is not Nazi or fascist. The hate. And again, I look at what the fascists did in Chile, Argentina, Brazil, and Nazi Germany, and they kill us. They put us in concentration camps. They wipe out trade unions. They abolish collective bargaining. In one of the countries, I forget which, Chile, I think, or Argentina, one of the two, within a year of the fascists taking over, real income of workers declined, fell to a half of what it was in 1 year. So let's not minimize. Nobody here is minimizing the hate they have for us. So we need to get on to talk about resistance. And there's three types. There's the electoral, which is not the most important, but it serves other purposes. And there's the street level. And something big in my personal history from my family from the East End of London was the Battle of Cable Street. No pasarán, they shall not pass. And it is a fundamental principle of anti-fascist and indeed anti-racist activism that we are there in bigger numbers. That brings me on to the point about the role of the state, which Enrico mentioned obliquely, and the role of the state. The state is a capitalist state. Yesterday, it was the police attacking with pepper spray, etc., attacking the anti-fascist demonstrators. It has always been thus. We must look at the role of the state and replacing the state. That's a big ideological issue, of course. Finally, I want to pick up again something Enrico mentioned, but perhaps we all share this: the need to have party, organisation, leadership, programme. We need to have an organised party but that party must not work in isolation. And in like many of us, perhaps all of us here, I try to use the work of Marx, Engels, Lenin, Rosa Luxemburg, and the role of party and the role of working with people outside the party as well in various united fronts. Now, all of us here are aware of dangers of united fronts, of being expelled from them, of losing our identity, of being taken over, etc. by them. So there are dangers, and there's a lot, and so we have to look at each situation. We have to look at each situation. But so I just wanted to end up on that point about the necessity, as in the Communist Manifesto, as in the writings, as in our writings, the writings we look at and try to learn from, the need to have an organization, the need to have our own particular perspectives, and to, as somebody said, we're not there yet. We're not in a counter-revolutionary. We're not in a revolutionary situation yet, but we must be ready, and we must. My final point: we must get over this sectarianism. I'm not accusing any of us of being sectarian. I've tried to devote the last 30 years of my political life to bringing people together in pan-Marxist organisations, but we have to prepare, we have to be organised, and we have to work with wider forces while being aware of those dangers.
Right, thanks, Dave. So I think we've just got time to take Enrico, and then I think we'll return to you, Finn, just to sum up the discussion. Yeah, is that okay, Finn?
Yeah.
Are you going to sum up the discussion at the end? Yeah. Okay, good. Go on, Enrico.
Yeah, I just want to make a point. I am perfectly agree with what Roger said. The 1930s have been a period with a lot of hope sometimes. You know, look at the Spanish Revolution, the Civil War in Spain. The thing that I want to make just regarding the party, the constitution of the party, is this. The crisis that happened before the First World War ended with the October Revolution, because it was a Bolshevik party organized as a cadre party with experience, discipline, etc., that was able to do in a revolution, to change, to beat for a few moments, the capitalism. In the crisis of the 30s, was not thanks to the Stalinists that they switch off, they kill the majority of the Bolshevik, of the communist internationally, even Trotsky, you know. After the war, what we have, for example, you make the example of Italy. Yes, Italy, the working class, have worked, have fight, have had a lot of debt, and more or less they won. But Togliatti, that he was the leader of a Stalinist party, betrayed the working class and make the pacification. That was because it was not a Bolshevik party, was not a party in what we, a lot of communists, we intend. So I am perfectly agree with you, but the difference in the two crises is evident. In one crisis with the Bolshevik party, we had the October Revolution. In the second crisis of the Second World War, we had the pacification. And Togliatti signed that he was a minister of, how you said in English, of justice. He signed to make free all the fascists that were in prison. And in the same time, they were putting in prison the partisan, the working class, that they want to do a revolution. So that is why I say it's important to analyze and see what we need, and we need a party. In our opinion, a Bolshevik party. I finish. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Enrico. Mike Craig has just joined us. Mike, are you there? Because I think we were keen to hear from you. Mike Craig. Sure if he's in. Oh, no. Oh, he's there. Comrades, okay if we carry on for about an extra 10 minutes or so, if Mike's able to give us a report from Northern Ireland.
Can you hear
Are
me?
you there, Mike? Hello?
Yep, can you hear me?
We can, yeah. We're going to
Hello?
carry on just a little bit longer because we'd like to hear from you about the events in Belfast.
All right. No, I've been having internet problems, which is why I wasn't on earlier. I was at the anti-racist rally yesterday. The mainstream media reported a presence of 3,000. There was actually 20,000 people in Belfast. It's the biggest one in history of the city. The police were given, Jerry Carroll of People Before Profit had a go at the police about not doing enough with the rioters, which isn't really fair. That's not how the police work there. They have an agreement with politicians to not get stuck in whenever there's a situation like that. They do is they film the rioters and then identify them and then go and arrest them later, without causing more mayhem. And they've already arrested, 20 to 30 people and have charged them for rioting. Yesterday, a leading figure of the far right in Britain was at the side of our rally yesterday. And when they started shouting, the police arrested them and moved them on. So the police have taken a side in this. They're against racism, and that has to be said. Even some unionist politicians, because there's been a lot of accusations that it's loyalists who are behind all this. That isn't quite true. I mean, there are no loyalists behind it. The riots in the south and the anti-immigration marches that are going on in the south of Ireland, there are no loyalists there. And you'll see whenever they have their own little protests against immigrants that they carry the Union Jack and the tricolour, which makes it very confusing. So you can see that the far right have broken down the sectarian divide in some cases, which is not what we're used to here. Usually people can be put into a pigeonholed into a box, and you can't do that now. One of the speakers, who's Deputy General Secretary of NIPSA, the biggest union in Northern Ireland, he said on the platform that if the riots and the racist attacks continue, that we would shut this place down. Now, obviously, it's illegal to call for a general strike, but that's, in other words, what he was calling for. And he said that he was going to take it to the Trade Union Congress and put it to them that if this continued, that workers would drop down tools. And he said to us, let's be democratic. I want to see hands up anybody that wants us to stop work if these riots and attacks and pogroms continue. And there was an overwhelming response to that. So that's a reality now. That's what how we're going to deal with this. And the far right won't have a chance if we bring the place to a standstill. Any questions?
Yeah, Got any quick questions for Mike? Stick your hand up quick if you have. I can't see anybody indicating. No, it doesn't
Yeah,
look
it's
like
just
it, Mike.
over it. There isn't much more to say, really. You know,
I'm just going to ask Finn.
online there's been. Sorry, go ahead. Is
Thanks
somebody
very
going
much
to
for
ask me something?
yeah. Yeah, thanks for joining us, Mike. That was really useful. Ian, have you got a quick question before Finn's
Yeah,
sums up?
for Mike, you were saying, weren't you?
Yeah.
Just about the situation in Northern Ireland with the loyalist paramilitaries and those kind of reactionary networks. I even heard that long before this particular crime, that was the cause that they cited of the riots, there'd been plans to riot. And so, yeah, basically the situation as regards loyalism and the switch over from loyalism to the more more traditional far right, as it were, of the rest of the mainland, as opposed to the narrative we're sometimes getting of it being a cross community racism, with Dublin's riots, and even Tommy Robinson talking about bringing the Catholics and the Protestants together against the immigrants. So yeah, any thoughts on that, and on the reports that this was pre-planned before the Sudanese maniac attacked that guy and apparently triggered it?
Thanks, Ian. Have you got a response, Mike?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, there are some loyalists involved in it, but loyalism is a very big group of people, and any protests that these people have are in dozens, not hundreds or thousands. There is a bit of a crossover there. What happened last year was that Racist Watch actually filmed and recorded some of these guys looking at houses and sort of marking them, this and creating a list of houses that would be attacked. So the list has existed since August last year, and some of the houses on the list were in fact attacked this week. The police didn't take it seriously at the time. They were given the list. Even George Galloway had it on his show the other day there, the list. But it's only been discovered this week that list has existed since last year. And so the police have something to answer for, that they didn't take it seriously and do anything about it, I think their thing was nobody is committed, you're right in that sense, but no, it's not just a loyalist-led thing. What would make it different is that because there are loyalists involved in it, they are used to knowing how to target people better than the far right in England would, and they're better at getting weapons and all the rest of it. That's the only difference.
We now need to move to the summing up, really, and then I'm sure we perhaps need to have a meeting on Northern Ireland fairly soon, I think. Right, Finn, you just briefly sum up?
It's been an excellent discussion, full of useful information, full of insights, full of stuff that we can go away and think about and see, can we make changes in our interventions based on what we've heard in this discussion. Mike Craig's talk there was very confident and very different from what people would expect in the north of Ireland. I read a report in the papers that there was an attempt to bring Catholic and Protestant communities together in the campaign to get rid of black people, and it wasn't successful. It didn't take off. I think in this discussion, which I thought was a good discussion, there was a lot of focus on the marginalization of communities. And that's a very important starting and a very important central point, because this question of racism, fascism, and all the other things doesn't arise in the abstract. It's not a set of ideas that come out of a thesis. It's based in the reality. And the reason that the right wing can pick up support is because of marginalization and, as Dave expressed it, impoverishment. In America, as comrades know, and as Jack, I'm glad, has explained the growing unpopularity of Trump, as comrades know, there's been cuts in the welfare budget, in the health budget, in the care of older people. And all of that piles up to show that the working class in these communities are suffering under the Trump regime. And the collapse of manufacturing industry, particularly across the Midwest, is where Trump got his votes. And it's good to be aware that, again, these issues of deindustrialization, particularly the collapse of the manufacturing industry, are part and parcel of the growth of the right wing and fascist influence in these areas. The United Front, as we often discuss it, is the essential component in the resistance. It was good to hear Dave's description of what happened. When you hear about a right-wing mobilization, you mobilize more. Now, that's not always easy to do, but that's exactly what we have to aim at. And it's very important that Dave is able to explain how that's carried out in Brighton. It might be necessary now to add to the Cable Street achievement, the Brighton achievement, where Dave and his comrades managed to push the right wing into a more minority position where they are the ones who feel on the receiving end. The issue of democracy is important because as long as we have the possibility, for instance, in America, for that matter in France, there's an election coming up in 2027, when there's an opportunity to vote and to mobilize, we must take these opportunities. Whatever the election is, whether it's a local election, a national election, a presidential election, or whatever it is to be, the organizations of labor have to make use of that election, not just to win people into positions in Parliament, but also to raise the ideas and the program on which it's possible to defeat capitalism and to defeat the right. So where the opportunities arise under a democratic system, we have to make use of these opportunities, make full use of the opportunities. And while Enrico was right, in the end, the capitalists allow democracy because that's the form of rule they prefer, because there's less trouble for them. So they make their profits, they draw in the rents from the housing and so on. And they prefer that. Then there's no trouble on the streets. But when it comes to it, they will abandon democracy and go for the alternative option of the destruction of the organizations of the labor movement. But when the opportunity is there, we must avail of it. And the similar example was given with regard to Glasgow, which Ian spoke about. I want to just pose a warning here. 9 years after Hitler took power, after he became, not took power, when he became involved in the Workers' Party, what became the National Socialist German Workers' Party, in 1928, that party, at that stage led by Hitler, got 2.6% of the vote. By 1932, a couple of years later, a few years later, they were the major party, the biggest party in Germany. So we sometimes look at the vote too kind of carefully and say, oh no, I should only get 2 and 3%. And that's not the way to look at it. The real living experience of people, of workers, of communities is where we find the answers to these questions, not in just a simple examination of the returns and they go, no, they're not going to get anywhere. The Nazis came to power from, as I said, the example of 2.6% to the largest party in the country. So wealth and its unequal distribution is a key part of this campaign. And the formation of socialist parties, as was explained in this discussion, is absolutely central. There's a terrible history amongst the social democratic parties, particularly of Europe. There was a time only a few years ago when the majority of countries in Europe were led by social democratic or Labour parties, not just the majority, the overwhelming majority, and a tiny minority were influenced, not even led by, but influenced by right-wing coalitions. The overwhelming majority were socialist parties and Labour parties. That's gone. They've all been kicked out one after the other. In some countries, the socialist parties, for example, in Italy, have practically disappeared. In France, it's disappeared. What's happened in Britain is what was a mass Labour Party with socialist policies has now become just a kind of second version of the capitalist parties. And that didn't take a long time to achieve. And it's that collapse of social democracy and the Labour parties that have cleared the way for the right wing to come in and say, well, actually, they're all the same, they all believe in the same things. They do believe in the same things, but the solution is not a right wing solution. The solution is the socialist policies that we've often explained, we've often discussed here. So once again, in conclusion, I want to thank the comrades for a very informative and a very useful discussion, which will add considerably to our understanding of the issues and help us all on the ground in the kind of work that we do. And when we go back now to our organizations and attempt to build the United Front, which is an essential United Front against racism, it's an essential part of our work, we'll be able to draw on the examples that our comrades have explained to us during this discussion. So thanks again, comrades, for a very useful and a very informative discussion.
Thank you, Viv, for leading up today's discussion and for your summary, and to everybody who's joined into the debate. So we'll now return. We'll go over to Roger now about next week and the future, possibly.
Okay, next week we have a very interesting discussion, equally interesting discussion about. We've got a comrade who's an expert on modern slavery. Slavery is something which sort of people think is a nightmare of the past, but it's very much extant still today, and including in the most advanced capitalist countries and the traditionally industrial countries and so on. So we have an expert on that who's going to be speaking next week. I'd also like to draw attention of comrades to what we're doing on the following 3 weeks, the following 3 discussions after that, which are there was a circular which you may have just read. It's just, I think, went out a couple of hours before this meeting. But we traditionally, WIN has organised conferences, either online or hybrid or in-person conferences, where we discuss our general perspectives and general outlook. And we're holding the beginning of conference discussions staggered over a period online, and the next meeting after next week, in 2 weeks' time, will be a discussion of the document that we prepared called The New World Order. Then the following week, a discussion on another document on the trade unions. And thirdly, there'll be a discussion on building the international. These are not the end of a discussion, they're the beginning of a discussion which I hope comrades will participate in over a period. And I hope that comrades will not only come, but will encourage their own friends to come and join, because we want a wide and deep and thorough discussion. So see you, comrades, next week, and I hope subsequently too.
See you next week.
Thanks, comrades. Bye.